Is there such a thing as joy without sadness? Or grief without hope? We'll find out next on Horoscope Highlights.
What if the next episode of the Astrology Hub podcast was tailored just for you, your interests, your astrological level, your curiosity? This is within reach, and it all starts with your voice. After over 6 years of producing content for our community, we've decided to take a step back, reflect on, and revise the path forward. And we would love your input during this time. We invite you to share your thoughts on our podcast survey. This is your chance to shape the content that will support you most on your astrological journey. And to show our thanks for your invaluable input, when you complete the survey, you will automatically be entered into a raffle to win a free 30-minute reading with one of our incredible Astrologer Connect astrologers. Ready to contribute? Visit astrologyhub.com/podcastfuture or just click the link in the show notes. Your insights will illuminate the path for the content that you love. The future of our podcast is in your hands. Go to astrologyhub.com/podcastfuture to submit your input, plus enter your name into the raffle. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Christopher Renstrom, and I'm your weekly horoscope columnist here on Astrology Hub. And this week, I wanted to talk to you about the Sun-Mars Saturn squares taking place on November 23rd and November 25th. But before I do, did you know that you could find out about transits happening to your sign by subscribing to my weekly newsletter? Go to astrologyhub.com/horoscope. Again, that's astrologyhub.com/horoscope to subscribe to my weekly newsletter. And now, let's go ahead and talk about that Sun-Mars Saturn square taking place this week. This week, the Sun will be entering the exuberant sign of Sagittarius, followed closely on its heels by Mars. And no sooner do the Sun and Mars enter the zodiac sign of Sagittarius than they will both be forming a square to Saturn in the zodiac sign of Pisces. Now, your first response to this information might be like, bummer. Why bummer? Well, the reason why we might be bummer is because Sagittarius is known for its fiery optimism. It's known for having a faith in the deliverance of tomorrow, that things will all work out for the best in the end. Not only does Sagittarius have this burning optimism, which is really kind of like the keystone of the sign, but it also has this feeling that there's a reason why good things work out in the end, that if you are living in conjunction with your higher purpose, if you are living a good life, if you are doing the things that are morally correct or responsible, things that show a benevolence, a munificence, a generosity of spirit, and in your interactive behavior. If you are doing these things in your life, then you are creating good. And by creating good, you send good things out there into the world, into the lives of other people, and other people reciprocate by doing good things for you. And if you are a truer Sagittarius, then you will do these good things without a request or being asked. You just believe in being the glowing orb that everyone else gathers around because you have a belief that things will turn out for the best in life, that the universe is good, and that people are essentially good as well. And it's this undeniable belief that you hold deep inside your heart and soul. In addition to this munificence of spirit that you have as a Sagittarius, you also have a love of adventure and a love of the world. To you, going out into the world is one of the most exquisite and pleasurable things, to go and journey to states, to countries, to hemispheres where you've never been before, to engage with cultures and peoples whom you would never have met unless you had traveled there, and to get lost in the diversity of humanity. This is the great dream of any Sagittarius. So to link the idea of living a higher purpose-fulfilled life with going out into the world and experiencing the eclecticism and the diversity of humanity These are the things that make Sagittarius very unique among all the zodiac signs that we have. And so again, this optimism, this feeling that things will work out for the best, that essentially people are good, these are very important to you. Now, do the planets, the Sun and Mars, encourage this behavior? Do they support it? Yes, they do. The Sun is always identifying with the idea that the sun rises on a new day, that no matter what aggravation you go through, things will look better tomorrow. Okay, so there's already that optimism that we have with the Sun. And when that's combined with the planet Mars, then there's a real zest, there's a real fervor, there's a real insistence that things better turn out for the best. Okay, so when you have a Sun and Mars combined together in the sky, you really have this zest, this zeal, this tackling down, taking on any great obstacle and emerging victorious. As long as you keep a good sense of humor, a positive frame of mind, and a belief that everything will turn out for the best in the end. Does Saturn and Pisces share this sentiment? No, it doesn't. Okay, Saturn in Pisces does not share this sentiment. What happens when Saturn is going through the zodiac sign of Pisces, and this is true of Saturn in any sign, it will bring out the qualities of the sign that the sign would rather you not know about. Okay, so Saturn will bring out the darker or the more negative qualities of a sign. Now, some people might assume that Saturn does this because Saturn is always the spoiler of the party. And if you're born under Sagittarius, you love a good party. So you want nothing to do with Saturn because Saturn always spoils the party. But Saturn does have a reputation for being a bit of a spoiler. It doesn't go along with what is good. It doesn't believe that good things happen to just good people. It doesn't believe that the universe looks out after everyone the same. Saturn believes very much that there are people who are disenfranchised, that there are people who do not get their fair share, that there is a lot of grief and tragedy in the world, and Saturn brings this to bear in whatever zodiac sign it happens to be traveling through. For instance, Saturn in Gemini, where Gemini is naturally curious, Saturn in Gemini might color it a darker color, like skepticism or cynicism. Instead of being curious, a Saturn in Gemini might be like, been there, done that, heard that, not interested. Where Virgo believes in hard work and service for other people, and that the mind can figure things out, can solve almost any problem, Saturn in Virgo might bring about a tedium of work, might cast a shadow, which is the exercise of futility, that for all of your hard work, you're going nowhere in your life. You think you're building something, but actually you're just a hamster. You're just a hamster running on an exercise wheel until you get thirsty, hop off, drink from your water bottle. Then, because the call of work is like a siren call to any Virgo, you hop back on that exercise wheel and keep on running in place, and nothing you produce amounts to anything. I mean, these are, as you can tell, darker sentiments that Saturn will bring to any zodiac sign. Hello, it's Christopher Renstrom again. I remember the old days when people used to ask, tell me something about my sun sign. Nowadays, they ask, tell me something about my entire astrological chart. Thank heavens for AstroGold mobile app. It's easy to use. All you have to do is tap one chart, type in the person's birth information, press view, and voila, there it is. I can text, email, or message them their chart to their favorite social media app of choice. Let's face it, astrology is hard enough to navigate. Your astrology app shouldn't have to be. Ready to upgrade? Go to astrologyhub.com/astrogold. Again, that's astrologyhub.com/astrogold. And remember to type in AstroHub15 to get 15% off. Now, let's get back to our episode. So, what happens when Saturn is traveling through the zodiac sign of Pisces? Well, Pisces, we know, is a sign that is deeply feeling. It's very sympathetic, it's powerfully compassionate and empathetic, and it feels people's emotions and feelings without really making any kind of judgment. Okay, so Pisces, which is a sign that is no stranger to hurt and pain, and it's a sign that's no stranger to suffering, understands these things. So Saturn in this sign, it doesn't increase the pain and suffering, which might be, sometimes the first idea of like, what does it mean to have Saturn in the sign? But what Saturn does in the sign is bring a kind of loneliness to that pain and suffering. In other words, if you have Saturn in Pisces, you might be very sensitive or compassionate to the suffering or pain and other people's lives, but you don't really share the suffering and pain that's going on in your own life. Saturn in Pisces, I've often seen in charts, kind of manifests as this feeling of, or it's really more like a question, which is along the lines of, did someone leave me in a basket at the footstep of a church when I was a baby? Because people with Saturn and Pisces don't really feel like they belong with their family. They don't really feel like they belong with their friends. They're lacking that basic emotional bonding that is so important. And it can come across as fear and anxiety around the idea of abandonment, and sometimes in attempts to control, manage, or deflect that feeling, someone with Saturn and Pisces will throw up that kind of emotional distance and not really allow people to get close, which is ironic because they can often be found in professions or careers where they're administering to either the pain or the suffering of someone, or someone's emotional process is part of what they're trying to help that person with. You would see that, for instance, with a therapist, or you might see that with an artist, someone who struggles with their own doubts and their own sense of pain and suffering and isolation, and yet expressed through this extraordinary artwork. So there's a kind of loneliness to a Saturn in Pisces, a feeling of being inconsolable, even though they are probably the first ones to console, and very touchy around the idea of victimhood or victimization. They don't want to be seen as a victim, even if they were to narrate the circumstances in their lives. And most people would say, "Oh my goodness, you were abused, you were hurt. This is incredible victimization." They would be the first ones that say, "No, it's not," and might not even share those stories for fear of being seen as a victim. And people with Saturn and Pisces can also have a very strong reaction to someone who sounds like a victim. There's always a kind of suspicion. Saturn brings that kind of cynicism or skepticism. There's a kind of suspicion of like, you're saying you suffer, but I don't really see it. I see a kind of privileged background, or what about you is suffering, or maybe you're just playing the drama queen to get sympathy. And so there can be that kind of hardness to a Saturn in Pisces, because it really doesn't want to deal with the idea of helplessness. All right. So Saturn in Pisces can, in some cases, be resistant to anything that is optimistic. Okay. They can be resistant to, well, there's a higher purpose for everything that happens. And they might be like, well, what about the latest war? What about the latest massacre? What about the latest, what's the higher purpose of that? And a Sagittarius might be like, well, and then like, what is the higher purpose to that? Come up, spit it out, fire sign with arrow, with bow and arrow and galloping horse, spit it out. Okay, and so Sagittarians might be like, but and so there's a resistance to that kind of optimism, or there's a resistance to that explanation. There's a resistance to rationalizing pain and suffering or assigning it some sort of spiritual attribute. A Saturn in Pisces does not believe in that. Now, that doesn't mean that they believe in wallowing in grief or in pain, but they also don't believe in false securities and false hopes and false promises. So, when you have a square taking place between a very exuberant sun made even more enthusiastic with a Mars conjunction or close proximity to Mars entering the zodiac sign of Sagittarius, which believes that faith will overcome. If you believe, it overcomes, or if you sign on for this humanitarian cause, it will overcome, or if you join this call to justice, you will overcome. This is pretty much the thrust. That everyone must believe in things that are positive. This can be a very strong thrust with the Sun and Mars both in Sagittarius. And the resistance of the Saturn and Pisces can be equally strong. It can be equally like, you call out for justice, but look at all these horrible things that are happening as a result. You say you're being humanitarian, but look at all these sacrifices that you're making. Look at the way that you've turned a blind eye. And so people might be like, but how? But, you might be right with these criticisms. You might be right with poking these holes. But what's your solution to that? And oftentimes what can happen with the Saturn and Pisces is to poke more holes. And so you kind of have these differences, these irreconcilable differences that are made more powerful, that are exasperated by the square that's taking place in the sky. So simply put, a square between the Sun and Mars and Saturn would be disappointment. More complexly put, which is why I would like to unpack it, is what's going on here with a square. A square presents a problem. A square presents a conflict. And in the square's nature, one must prevail over the other. Okay, that's what squares are about. You've got two planets that are locked in sort of like hand wrestling match at a bar with different people like, knock him out, Billy. Okay, so as they go back and forth like this. But squares can also appear as two compelling and competing arguments where you can't find the middle ground, where you cannot find the solution. And that to me is that to me really is the beauty of the square. Okay, it's because the emotions or the impulses are so conflicted that one's not really going to win over the other. And so somehow there's going to be a third way that's going to emerge. I mean, yeah, with a square, they can just keep butting heads over and over and over again until both fall over an exhausted heap. But sometimes, and this often happens with Saturn squares, the butting of the heads gets so tedious that, the two sides are kind of like, okay, we really have to find a better way to get through this impasse. And that is the potential that always exists inside of a square like the one that we're talking about this week. Now, an example of this that comes to mind, and one that I would love to share with you simply because it's one of my favorite movies. Okay, that's why I'm sharing it with you. But an example of this that comes to mind is Pixar's film Inside Out. I think it was produced in 2015 or something like that. And Inside Out is one of those real Pixar gems where they just it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. And it's a lovely, marvelous story. It's a story about a young pre-teenage girl. I think maybe she's 11 in the film, and her name is Riley. And she is living in Minnesota, and she loves ice hockey, and she's got two great parents, and she's just living a really, really great life. And, then we cut to the inner life of Riley, okay? And the inner life of Riley is portrayed as a console, okay, a control panel, which is operated by 5 emotions, okay? And these are the emotions inside Riley's head. Okay, these are the emotions inside Riley's mind. This control console exists inside Riley's mind. And the creators of this film were very quick to point out that this was not Riley's brain, like physical brain, but mind as in psychology. Okay, and the 5 controlling emotions are joy, okay, which is this inextinguishable, irrepressible optimism and happiness and joy. And she's in yellow. And then there's Sadness, who sort of has like this bangs haircut, and she's blue, and she's round in her face and wears glasses, and she's very, very sad, and she is inconsolable. She's always sad. All right. And then there are the emotions Fear, who is always coming up with everything that could possibly be wrong and would cause great fear and trepidation and anxiety. There's Disgust, who's like, ew, gross, broccoli. I hate broccoli, who just is very expressive of what she doesn't like. And then there's Anger, who is always ready to blow his top. Okay, and these are the overriding emotions, or these are the emotions that exist in Riley's mind, in her personality. And together, these emotions, and I just love the way that they set it up, together, these emotions create core memories. These are experiences that are colored by the emotion, and maybe were triggered by the emotional response, and are associated with the emotion. An easy way of putting it would be like, oh, I remember that time. I was so mad. I was so angry. Okay, anger has created a core memory, and so it's logged or uploaded into the computer file of Riley's mind. I mean, they're working a lot with this idea of algorithms and loading up into modern technology and all these sorts of things. This is the playing field that we're visiting here. And so there can be core memories that are very sad. There can be core memories that are joyful. There can be core memories of like, oh my God, I hate that. I'll never go near that again. Okay. Anger, like I talked about, and core memories that can be fearful, that talk about a time when Riley was very afraid. And again, they're all sort of uploaded and stored in Riley's psychic data bank. Now, what do these core memories do? They do more than just store. They actually generate personality. Okay. They generate what's called in the film islands of personality, which are basically things that Riley has emotional investment in and that she identifies with. And at the beginning of our story, there's Goofball Island, and Goofball Island holds all of her like goofy craziness when she was like a little baby and a toddler and a child, and the fun and the laughter that comes with it, and for instance, she liked to imitate a monkey when she was a little girl, and her dad imitates a monkey, and that's his way of getting her to laugh and chuckle. And they bonded over this. Okay, so there's an island of personality that's called Goofball Island. There's Friendship Island, where she stores all of her friendships. There's Hockey Island, because Riley loves to play hockey. There's Honesty Island, because Riley's always very upfront with what she's feeling. It's interesting that honesty gets an island. It's not a value. It's who Riley is. She's a very upfront type of person. And then there's Family Island, and Riley is an only child, and she's very bonded to her parents, and they really are a team, the three of them. Everything is going well. It's childhood, everything's going well. Riley's been born into a wonderful family, and all these emotional consoles, and everyone's pressing their buttons and having their say. They're the different congress of impulses that exist within all of our psyches, and which we see personified by the planets in the sky. If you think about it, the planets in astrology aren't too dissimilar from Riley's console. Okay, we have a planet of anger. We have a planet of disgust. With all these expressions and more can be visited and recognized in the planets and their transits in the sky. So it's a kind of really a wonderful comparison or allegory for the two. So what happens in the film is that there's an unexpected move from Minnesota. I think the father's working for a startup company or something like that. And so he has to move the family from Minnesota to San Francisco. And Riley has no say in it. Riley didn't see it happening. Suddenly she has to leave all of her friends and her childhood and her favorite places and move to this faraway city, which is San Francisco. And at first, Riley's really kind of optimistic about it. She's adventurous. This is like great. Like, let's see what lies beyond the next bend. But she gets to San Francisco, and they move to a very depressing part of town. and the house is very depressing, and the moving van has lost their things, and things aren't set up. And Riley, who's trying to be very happy, who's trying to put a very good face on things, is starting to slip. She's starting to not feel happy or safe or even optimistic about the future. And so this is where the emotions step in. The first emotion who starts touching things that she shouldn't be touching is sadness. There are these glowing orbs of joy, and this is joy's province. These are the joyful memories, these are the joyful emotions, and they're kept in a particular tray. And sadness goes and touches one of them, and it goes from a glowing golden to a melancholic blue. And joy immediately is like, what's going on? What's going on? Sadness is like, I don't know, I just touched it, and it just turned blue like this. And joy is like, don't do that. Don't touch those emotions. Don't fuss with those things. And this has a parallel at that moment. What's happening is that Riley's mother has come into Riley's room where Riley has a sleeping bag. They have no furniture. She's feeling very alone and very lost. And her mother comes in to be consoling. And in her attempt to be consoling, she gets Riley to laugh, and Riley laughs, and she's like, there it is. There's that smile that I depend on, and it's your happiness, that we really look to during this time. I want you to be, my happy kid, my happy daughter, and the mother leaves. Now, the mother thought that she just, got Riley into a good mood, like she was consoling her loneliness. But Riley starts to interpret that or internalize that as an expectation that's being put on her to be happy. So what we see here with this Sagittarius Pisces square, which I wanted to demonstrate through the telling of this film, is that there is a genuine sadness that Riley is feeling. And so this is why sadness has gone and started touching the joy globes, and joy is like, get away from that, get away from that. What we see exhibited in Riley's exterior life is her mother, in an attempt of being consoling, actually placing on Riley an expectation to be happy when she's not. All right. And this goes against that sense of family and closeness. And this also goes against Honesty Island, she's not feeling that, but she has to express that. And so in a way, she's being dishonest. And what's happening here is a beginning rift between Riley and the rest of her family. So Joy tries to be an upper, because Joy's programmed for everything to be joyous and good. She's Sagittarius on steroids, okay? And there's a lovely scene where Riley is falling asleep, and memory is leading into dream, and Riley's remembering skating on a lake, and Joy goes and she skates on the floor in front of this view screen, and she kind of like accompanies Riley's memory of skating with her joy. And it's a lovely demonstration of memory and emotional association that's going on here. And Joy, for all intents and purposes, wants to keep Riley aloft. She wants to keep Riley happy. She wants to keep Riley optimistic. So the following day, when all the emotions, regather at the console, again, Joy comes up with a really great idea. What she's going to do with Sadness, who, as you remember, went and touched a glowing joy orb, and that orb turned blue and it didn't turn back again. So Joy is very alarmed that Sadness might spread like an infection to all the other emotional orbs. So Joy is very worried that Sadness might, if she continues touching all the other emotional orbs, spread like an infection throughout Riley's psyche. She goes and she takes a piece of chalk and she draws a circle on the floor, and she asks Sadness to go and stand in that circle. And Sadness does. And Joy says, you have a job to do, and focus on one thing only. And Sadness is like, okay, what is it? And she's like, it's staying inside this circle. And Sadness is like, I don't feel like staying inside this circle. And Joy's like, stay inside this circle and everything's going to be fine. So what Joy is trying to do is contain sadness in this one place, which is often what we try to do with Saturn. when we experience it in our charts. We want to sort of draw a circle, all right, put Saturn in it, and not let Saturn go and fiddle around or mess up the rest of our horoscope. Okay, this is what we want to do with things that make us sad. This is what we want to do with things that make us depressed. We want to draw a little circle on the floor, make it stay there, and then go about our day. What's kind of interesting about that is that it puts me immediately in mind of like magic from Shakespeare time or Christopher Marlowe, where they summon demons, and they do this by drawing a circle on the ground, and so the demon is brought and summoned into that circle, and that's where they stay. They can't leave it. They're bound. That's the only place on the planet on Earth that they can reside is within this circle. And so, in her own sort of like kooky way, Joy does that exact thing with sadness. But sadness is drawn to Joy's glowing orbs. She can't help it. And as Joy goes and, manages the other parts of Riley's psyche, she looks over, and sadness can't help but touch the glowing orbs, making Riley sad. And what's happening here, remember that defiance that I was talking about with Saturn and Pisces? There's an honesty to the sadness, to the sorrow. And so sadness, it's not by choice. Sadness cannot stop herself. She doesn't want to be touching these orbs, but she has to. And that's Riley behaving on a very deep level. Sadness has to reflect what's going on in Riley's psyche. So Joy comes over, they get into a fight and a tussle and an argument over the whole thing. And of course, someone hits a wrong switch or something, a tube opens up, and Joy and sadness go flying up through this tube and thrown into the impossible to navigate terrain of Riley's long-term memory banks. Okay, which is where they're spat out. So they are thrown out of the console by accident and end up in some remote corner of Riley's long-term memory banks, which are they're described as a warren of shelves and paths that just are unending, where all these things are these memory globes are stored, and it's impossible to navigate one's way through it. But they're going to try to go. And as they do this, sadness begins to cry, and Joy's like, "Why are you crying?" She's trying to like make sadness feel happy. And sadness says, "Crying helps me to slow down and obsess over the weight of life's problems." I had to share that because that's just such a Saturn and Pisces quote. Crying helps me to slow down and obsess over the weight of life's problems. So she's really being, portrayed as a downer. But now they have to find their way back to the console, because the only emotions at the console right now are fear, disgust, and anger. All right. And fear and disgust and anger, if you think about them, are basically psychological defense mechanisms. Fear, disgust, and anger. These are emotions that are meant to protect, to identify something that's toxic or repulsive, and to introduce caution so that one is not foolhardy. And anger is, like a willingness to fight or exert willpower, and out yell someone else. But where they're great as kind of like subsidiary emotions in a way, like if they're serving either joy or sadness, okay, but without joy and sadness, which are really kind of the two poles here, fear, disgust, and anger have no vision, they have no direction, they don't know what to do. And so basically they become reactionary, okay, so that Riley turns into a very recognizable 11 or 13-year-old, okay, who just rolls their eyes at everything, is full of self-loathing, is suddenly afraid of people being judgmental of her. Qualities of Riley's that were kind of like on the back burner are now running her console. And again, these are defense mechanisms. How much do our fear and our anger and our disgust rush in when there is a vacuum or when there is an emptiness of joy or sadness? And if you look at the world today and just in a sort of general way, you see how much fear and disgust and anger are running rampant blindly. There's no direction. There's no sense of going somewhere constructive or doing something constructive. It's all reactionary. And fear builds on anger, which builds on disgust, which builds on fear, which builds on anger, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really, really a lovely, it's really a lovely metaphor. It's not only a portrait of, an adolescent kid, a prepubescent kid or kid on the edge of puberty, but it's also, what happens when you don't have joy and when you don't have sadness. Okay. And so the plot of the film is really about joy and sadness's attempts to get back to the console and to get back in charge of Riley's life. And again, it began with this dispute of joy saying we cannot have sadness, we have to just have joy, and sadness not knowing why she needs to keep touching the orbs, but she's touching the orbs because guess what? That's what Riley's feeling. But now that they've been jettisoned from the console, Riley isn't feeling either joy or sadness. Riley is feeling fear and disgust and anger. And in a moment of peak, because she feels like her parents aren't listening to her, Anger, who's in charge of the console, decides to plug in the impulse. As you might imagine, there's no impulse control with anger. Anger decides to plug in the impulse of running away from home, And Anger's point of view is, let's get her back to Minnesota. That's where she was happy. Her parents have failed her. She's pissed off. I'm pissed off. And let's get her back there. So Riley is now running away from home. And in her decision to run away from home, the islands of her personality begin crumbling. They were already sort of on teetering ground. Goofball Island was the first to go because she was full of melancholia, and her father tries to play monkey with her, and she doesn't respond. She rolls her eyes, and her father's not reaching her, and so Goofball Island, goes rolling down into this yawning cavern called the memory dump, or memory pit. Memory dump is what it's called. And then followed that is friendship, when she learns that a friend of hers has found a new friend in Minnesota, and like her hockey team, missed her for a couple of days, but they don't anymore because there's this new player. So like Friendship Island went down into the pit. And then I think right now we're dealing with Honesty Island. Oh, Hockey Island goes down because her mother finds her a hockey team to try out for in San Francisco, but Riley is so angry, and so doesn't want to be living there that she just quits in the middle of tryout. So Hockey Island went down into the pit. Honesty Island is now going because she's running away from home and not being open with her family, and Family Island is looking on iffy ground. So there's this personality collapse, this collapse of dominoes that's taking place in Riley's psyche. And so again, the stakes are very high. Joy and sadness need to get back to being in charge of her console. But Joy isn't convinced that sadness is a necessary part of this. In fact, Joy is carrying the core memories in a knapsack and doesn't want sadness even near them. And so even though she kind of patronizes sadness and pretends a friendship with sadness, she just really doesn't want sadness to be involved at all. In fact, Joy, in a very Sagittarian way, wants to get back and get that upbeat, zeal, excited attitude about the future again, because being depressed is a downer. And all fire signs, Aries, Leo, or Sagittarius, really don't like the darker, downer emotions. Okay, it really cramps their style. It really burdens and weighs down their psyche. And so the fiery response to that is to basically be up and away, is to have an upbeat personality and be focused on something in the future. And if you don't like your circumstances, then leave your circumstances and go somewhere else, to be true to a higher purpose, which is to be in a good mood or on adventure or something which is going to be optimistic. Fire signs don't like to be around downers. You pour water on a fire to put it out, right? Or you throw earth on a fire to put it out. So fire signs can have difficulty with earth signs and with water signs because these are dousing types of energies. At one point, they meet Bing Bong, who is Riley's imaginary friend, who's part elephant, part a fox, I think, something with the tail, and then part dolphin. I don't know. It's hysterical. It's a great character. But at some point, they meet Bing Bong, who's Riley's forgotten imaginary friend, who's still sort of like rumbling around, the data banks. But Bing Bong had this kind of like, let's pretend sled where they would sing a song and, fly up to the moon. Like that's what he would do with Riley, And while they're trying to get back to the console, there's this kind of cleanup psychic crew that's going and getting rid of memories that are not useful anymore. It's kind of like what we might call baggage or cleaning your cache in your computer. And so this cleanup team is getting rid of memories, and the memories they get rid of are memories that are no longer nurtured. They're no longer recalled. They're no longer, they used to be cared for, but they're not anymore. And so they take a vacuum and sort of like, vacuum up these memories. And the imaginary friend, Bing Bong, is kind of like hiding out. He knows he's on slippery ground here with the, not being a cherished memory because she barely remembers who he was. And he knows that his days are numbered, but he helps Joy and Sadness to plot a course back to the console. At one point, the sing-along rocket, which is what he had with Riley, is thrown into the memory dump. The cleanup crew comes for it and they get rid of it. And he's sad. He starts to cry, and Joy comes and says, well, that was a wonderful thing. Maybe we don't need a sled anymore. We can still sing songs to Riley. Like she's coming up with like, look on the bright side type of thing. And Bing Bong is not moved. But it's Sadness who goes and sits down with Bing Bong. And Sadness says, I'm sorry that they took your rocket. They took something you loved, and now it's gone forever. And at that point, Bing Bong just starts crying, and Joy's like, what's the point of this? You're like such a downer, but the thing is, he cries and then he clears his tears and he's like, okay, let's get back to getting you guys back to the console, and Joy is like, what happened here? Like you said this was a horrible thing. He began crying and now he's up and ready to help us again. And Sadness said, I don't know. All I know is that he was sad. So I listened. And that's a really beautiful moment, and not one that we associate with caring. A lot of times when we hear about someone's problems, or we are a witness to their worries, or we're the shoulder that someone is leaning on, we can feel like we have to have an answer, like we have to have a solution, like we have to take that sadness that someone's feeling, come up with an answer that's going to solve the problem, tie it up in a pretty bow, and give it back to that person. And this is Joy's perspective, pretty much. Sadness doesn't do that. Just like Sadness touches the glowing orbs and turns them from joy to sad, but doesn't know why she does it, Sadness sits with someone in their woe and says, that must be very, very sad. And the person cries, but then they feel better again because they cried. All right. And so this is what Sadness understands. She can't articulate it, but she understands it. So Joy finds a way to get the core memories into a recall tube and get back to the console, and everything's going to be saved. Bing Bong helped them get there, and this is going to be a good thing. And so Sadness is like, well, let me get into the recall tube with you. We'll both go back to the console and make things right again with Riley. And Joy says, oh, no, not you. I'm sorry. I've been through too much craziness or whatever. Sadness, you're just bad news. You stay here. I'm going to go in the recall tube. I've got these last 5 recall memories of Riley's, and I'm going to plug them in. I'm going to make Riley happy again. And Sadness, I love you. You're really great and everything. But no, you're not coming near the console tube. We don't need you. All right. And it's really this wonderful, poignant moment and it also illustrates the square. You have these 2 combating ideas. One's trying to get over the other. Sadness isn't really trying to make her case, but Sadness is fighting in a Saturnian way. It's through her resistance. Okay. She is resisting being told that she should be happy because Sadness is sad. That's who she is. And so there's this fight. You kind of get a feeling like there's a alliance or friendship that's grown up between the 2 of them because of their adventures through abstract thought and the land of imagination. This film is so brilliant. But anyway, and so this has bonded them, this adventure together. But when it comes down to that sort of tap your ruby slippers 3 times and say there's no place like home moment, when there comes that time where they can travel back through the recall tube to the console and make things right, Joy turns to Sadness and says, not you. You're not right. You're not going to make things right. I'm taking back the joy. We're getting rid of the sadness, and I'm going to make things good again. And that is such a powerful moment in this Sagittarius Pisces square. So, of course, Sadness is sad. She's heartbroken, and she turns and she leaves, because she thought they were friends. And Joy is flying through the heavens, back to the console in this recall tube. But she runs into trouble because Riley is now on a bus running away from home. Things are eroding in the personality. She's shut off to anything. She's stole money from her mother to purchase this bus ticket back to Minnesota. She's lied to her family. She's closed all the doors to anyone who would be a friend or a support. And she's reactionary. She's being piloted by fear, disgust, and anger. So there's no, and it's a wonderful analogy here. There's no personality anymore. Okay. The personality islands have all gone down, into the memory dump. And so there's no personality. It's just this reactionary, raw psyche. Okay. That's making disastrous choices. She's an 11-year-old on a bus heading back to Minnesota. What do you think is going to happen? It's not looking good. Okay. And so as a result, the recall tube falls down into the memory dump. There goes Joy. She falls down into the pit of really Riley's nihilism. There's nothing of Riley that's recognizable in her behavior. And Bing Bong goes down there with her, and Sadness is wandering through the labyrinth of long-term memory data. And it's, as anyone knows from a Pluto transit or Saturn transit, it's Joy down in the pit. And she tries to scramble back up and she can't numerous times. And she takes out these joy glow orbs that she's been carrying in a knapsack. And they're no longer golden and luminous anymore. They're dull and they're gray and they're faded. There's a total disconnect that's taken place between Riley and her joy, which is demonstrated by this. And so in this wonderful moment, Bing Bong's Joy's like, what would you do to get Riley happy? And he's like, well, we would sing songs and get a sled. And, my sled was thrown down here. And they're like, let's get the sing-along sled. And they get the sing-along sled and they sing and the sled goes flying on up and it looks like it's going to get to the top of the cavern, but it falls down. And this happens a couple of times. And Bing Bong's like, let's try again. Joy's like, I don't want to. And Bing Bong's like, no, let's try again. And it's this, and Joy's like, no, I'm not interested. And she just doesn't want to try anymore. And in this moment, she looks at one of the memory globes, which is one where that sadness had touched. And it was a memory of Riley being happy with her hockey team, and also happy with mom and dad. But it's now been touched by sadness. And so so what she sees is a very lonely Riley. And Bing Bong says, well, don't you remember that's when Riley lost the hockey game? Like the whole game depended on her. She was going to hit the puck into the goal. She was really close. She lost the game, and she wanted to quit. She wanted to quit hockey, And Joy's like, I don't remember that. I just remember her being so happy about hockey and happy with the team. And Bing Bong's like, oh no, that was a rough moment. She was very, very sad. And then Joy was like, well, why are her parents there? And Bing Bong's like, her parents are there because they came out to console her. And Joy's like, they came out to console her. And Bing Bong's like, yeah, she was sad, and her parents knew that she was sad. And Joy was like, well, didn't they try to cheer her up or something? Like, no, they just came out and they sat with her because she was sad. And then she felt better. And you can see a light go off in Joy's eyes, that she's making this connection. She's like, okay, let's try this sing-along sled one more time. And so they do, and they're singing vibrantly, and it goes flying up. And at that moment, Bing Bong tumbles off the back of the sled. Okay, this and it's his weight because he's like an elephant. It's his, and he's made of cotton candy, and he's an elephant. Okay, that can be a dolphin. Anyway, it's an imaginary friend. What do you want? He falls off the sled. He kind of falls off the sled, and the sled makes it to the top, and Joy is delivered. And Joy goes running back, and she's like, Bing Bong. And at the moment, that is so heartbreaking. You see Bing Bong down in the pit with the faded memories, and he begins to fade. He says, wait, say hi for me, and when you take her to the moon, give her a hug. And he fades because there was never a place for this imaginary friend. Riley is maturing. She's growing old. She doesn't need him anymore. And so he fades. And it's in that moment that Joy really feels the sadness. She lost a companion, but she also comes to understand sadness. So she goes in pursuit of Sadness, who's heartbroken and solo, grabs Sadness. They come back to they get back to the console. And then there's this really beautiful moment where anger and disgust and fear are like, Joy, you're back. They're totally ignoring Sadness. And so they're like, Joy, you're back. Get back to the console. Make things right. And they're totally ignoring Sadness. They don't even register that she's there. And they're pushing Joy to the console. Joy goes to the console, and she begins to touch the panels, which are fixed and dark, but they're not lighting up. She's not animating them with her life force. They're locked closed because Riley is closed down psychologically. So this is like the nightmare of a fire sign is being closed down like this and just in a depression on this Greyhound bus heading Lord knows where. And so Joy turns and she's like, Sadness. And Sadness is like, yes. And she's like, come over here. And she's like, you don't want me touching the panel. She's like, please, touch the panel. Touch all of these buttons. Touch them. We need you now. And Sadness comes over and she begins to touch the different panels on the console. And they turn blue. And Riley turns sad. You see her looking out the bus window, and she turns sad. And what Sadness gives Riley is her memories of sadness. And with her memories of sadness, she revives. She wasn't sad before. She was without sadness. She was without joy. She was just fear and anger and disgust. And with this sadness, she remembers her friends and she remembers her family, and she, cries at the bus driver to stop, and she gets off the bus and she heads home. And her parents are like fraught with worry trying to find her. And so the parents are like, Riley, where have you been? Where have you been? And it's not until she gets home and she's with her parents that she begins to cry. For so much of this film, we've seen Riley angry, obnoxious, shut down, afraid, timid, anxious, mad, and just reacting and just quitting things and doing things that harm herself. But here we see her lose it. For the first time, she cries. She cries and she cries. And she says to her parents, I know you don't want me to, but I miss home. I know that you need me to be happy. I want to go home. And the parents reach out to Riley and they hold her. It's in this embrace of Riley just crying, and her parents being there for her and saying, we miss home too. They're not trying to make things better. They're not coming up with an answer. They say, we miss home too. And it's in that moment, of course, that the console comes to life, that the islands of personality reemerge, that Riley's psyche comes back to life, but it's not restored as the old Riley, as the child Riley. It's restored as a Riley who has matured, who has grown, who by letting in these feelings at the risk of being dragged down, and feelings maybe that she's gotten rid of because she didn't want to be hurt or disappointed, and she didn't want to believe in enthusiasm and joy anymore. We've all heard people who say, I don't want to fall in love because I don't want to be hurt, or, I will always be sad, and being asked to believe in joy is just beyond me. I can't even imagine wrapping my mind around that. I'm going to stay with sadness because that's protective. She's moved past those things. And all of a sudden, the globes, which were always solidly red for anger, or dark for fear, or blue for sadness, or golden for joy, or green for disgust, all of a sudden, these orbs take on a spectrum of color. Each of these orbs is full of a spectrum of color, not evenly balanced. There might be a little bit more red than anything else, or a bit more yellow than anything else, or green or blue, but they take on a spectrum of color because Riley has grown into a fuller personality, and this is this idea that the feeling of loss and missing something is what bonds her to her family again. She doesn't have to be the person who's happy all the time, or the problem all the time. But by saying I miss, and I have loss, this actually connects to both her parents who are feeling the same thing and trying to put their good face on it. And so sadness leads to a mix of joy and of other emotions that brings about a more polychromatic landscape. And this is something that can happen potentially through a square. A sextile will go for a sextile. A trine insists on harmony. An opposition is irreconcilable in its oppositeness. But a square can move from the nature of combat, of fighting, to the nature of collaboration, to the nature of mixing. One doesn't prevail over the other. And if you think of the word collaboration, which means co-labor, to work together, one doesn't prevail over the other. There doesn't have to be absolute agreement, okay? But there can be creativity in the differences, and there can be healing in the sorrow. And this is what the square between the Mars and Sun in Sagittarius to the Saturn and Pisces, this is the wonderful vision that these planets have to offer. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Horoscope Highlights. Please don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. Your support means a lot. See you next week.